When I'm out wheeling in the desert and it's 100+ degrees out there, keeping your drinks and food cold is really important. But the question is, which one of these is better? Well, today we're going to talk about some pros and cons of each one of them. Welcome to TrailRecon. I'm Brad, and today on this episode, we're going to be talking about 3 different coolers that I have used over the years, talking a little bit about the pros and cons of each one of them, a little side-by-side comparison. I think this should be a good time. Now, what we have here is a Rubbermaid 39-liter ice chest. It's a very cheap ice chest. Then I've got a Coleman 12-volt chiller, and I've had this for about 7 or 8 months. And then this I just recently got about 2 months ago, which is a Dometic CFX 40-liter refrigerator. And these all have lots of pros and cons, and we're going to talk about those in the video. Now, about 2 days ago, I loaded these up. I threw some ice in here, I plugged these in, I threw a bunch of drinks inside, and I've been checking the temperatures over the last couple days. And at the end of the video, I will show you the different temperatures of the 3 and how they kind of fared over the last 2 days. Now, before we roll into the pros and cons of each, just a couple quick reminders here about, cooling food. If you are storing perishable food, you want to make sure that it stays below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you're just chilling some drinks or whatever, that's not that big of a deal, but you want to make sure if you've got food that's perishable that you keep it below 40 degrees. The last thing you want is to get food poisoning when you're out on the trail. The other thing to keep in mind is you need to keep these clean. When you come off the trail and you empty everything out or you unplug these, to let them air out, give them a good sanitizing wipe down is really important. I've got a military medical background, and cleanliness is next to godliness, especially when it comes to coolers and refrigerators. The last thing you want is to have any kind of bacteria built up in here, and then that gets on your food or your beverages, and then you get sick from that as well. Another important tip, guys, is you want to pre-cool these. Now, for the ice chest, it's a good idea to throw some ice in there and let it sit for a few hours before you load it up. That kind of gets the cooler chilled in advance. For these two, for the chiller, the Coleman chiller specifically, it's a good idea to plug this in a few hours prior to loading it up. I have the optional plug that allows you to plug it into the wall, and I actually usually plug it in the night before. Whereas the Dometic refrigerator, you can plug this in about 45 to 60 minutes prior to loading it up, and it reaches temperature pretty quickly. And you also want to make sure that any food or drinks that you're putting here are not warm. You want to make sure they were refrigerated before you put them in here, because you don't want to introduce any heat into your cooler, because that will decrease the efficiency right off the bat. So those are just some of my recommendations. Now let's pull all this off here and let's start talking about the pros and cons of each one of these. So what I've got here, guys, is my 39-liter cheap old Rubbermaid cooler that I have had for many, many years. And this is not the most efficient ice chest. There are a lot of brands out there that are more efficient these days, but you're going to pay a high price for those. They're ranging anywhere from $200 to $400 and up from there. And my understanding from some friends that have those, that they hold ice pretty well for like 4 to 5 days. Whereas this little guy, if I'm lucky to get 2-3 days out of ice without it all melting, it was a success. Now, a couple things about putting ice in your chest is you want to make sure you cram it packed. You want to fill it all the way to the top. You want as little air gap inside your ice chest as possible. I've tried using, the frozen blocks, the little blue ice things, or I've frozen water bottles and put those in there, and they just are not as effective as throwing ice in there. Now, if you have access to like frozen blocks of ice that you can put in there, like cover the bottom in there, that's a good option. But otherwise, you need to fill this bad boy up with ice as much as you can. So let's talk a little bit about the pros of this. Well, obviously, price, right? Super, super cheap. I mean, you can pick up one of these at Walmart for what, 30 bucks? It's not very expensive at all. And the other great thing about these guys is that they are portable. Now, they do get a little heavy with the more ice you put in there, and especially if they start filling up with water, it all melts down. So it's a little heavy, but it's definitely portable. You can take this anywhere, and the benefit that this has over the other two that we're going to look at is you don't have to plug it in. You don't need any electricity. So that's a nice benefit. So some of the big cons here, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, is you've got to replenish the ice. You got to find a location when you're out and about on the trail, or if you're on a long trip, that you can buy ice from and replenish this. And if it's melted down to nothing but water, it's starting to warm up, you're gonna have to pull everything out of there, drain it, restock it. So that's a little bit of a con. The other thing, and this is kind of very important, this is a 39-liter cooler. And the other two that we're gonna look at are 40 liters. So this is just 1 liter smaller. But because I have to pack it full of ice, it takes up a third of the space. So I'm not able to put as much in here as I am in the other two. So storage is a big drawback. You're gonna need a larger cooler to handle as much storage as you will with the other two. And the last con, and this is kind of a personal one for me, is when things are in here and they're not properly wrapped up into plastic, they are gonna get waterlogged, and you do not want that. So that is a big negative about having one of these coolers. Now, let's talk about the Coleman 12-volt chiller. All right, next up, we are talking about this Coleman 12-volt chiller, and it is a chiller. Just remember that as we're going forward. This is not a refrigerator, but I've had this for about 7 or 8 months, and it's been a real good workhorse for me on day trips and just overnight trips. It's actually done a really good job, but it's fallen short on a few things. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the pros. The big pros on this is it's actually relatively cheap. This thing is only $79 over on Amazon. I'll leave a link down below if you want to check it out. And this thing is great for throwing in the back of any vehicle because it just plugs right in to a little 12-volt cigarette lighter. It's really perfect for that. And it's got this compressor on the back, and it's relatively quiet, although I did unplug it for the filming of this video because there was a pretty significant hum. But when I throw it in the back of the Jeep, I actually don't notice it. But if you're up close to it, you can hear it. Now, side by side with this one and the Dometic refrigerator, which we're going to take a look at, hands down, this one is much louder, but it's not crazy loud. And it's got a lot of space inside. Now, the only thing you need to kind of pay attention to is the inside compressor. You need to kind of keep that area clear. So that takes up a little space, but it does have this nice little tray in here, which can also be used as a divider. But a nice feature about this thing is this door can be reversed to open up on the other side. So depending on your application, that gives you a little bit of versatility. I really kind of like that feature. And one last pro is an optional thing that you can buy, which allows you to plug this in directly to your home wall outlet, which is really nice because then you can pre-chill this before you throw it in the car and hit the road. So that's actually something that I purchased and has made things really nice. Now let's talk a little bit about the cons on this cooler. Obviously, power consumption. It has to be plugged in, and oh, by the way, it uses about 5 amp hours or 60 watts total, which actually is quite a bit. When I plug this into my Jeep and I'm just driving around the trail, that's not a big deal. But when I pull up somewhere to camp, I've got an Optima red top battery in my Jeep and it's about 50 amp hours. If I'm gonna stay overnight, I actually unplug this because I don't want it to run all night long, because if you run in 8 to 10 hours, you're the potential to drain your battery all the way down. It's something that's always kind of caused me a little bit of anxiety. So if I'm camping overnight, I unplug this, which means it's not gonna maintain its temperature. Now, you probably would be okay if you're having a short overnight stay to leave it plugged in. I just don't recommend it. It's not something I'm going to do. So that, for me, the amp draw is a big con. And I also recently purchased a Goal Zero Yeti 400 with a 50-watt solar panel. And I was going to try to run this off of that, but it actually drains that pretty fast as well. The Goal Zero only has 33 amp hours of storage, and the 50-watt solar panel, it helps a little bit, and I'll do a separate review on those in the future. I think that'll actually be an interesting video to talk about how I can run the Dometic refrigerator off of that. But this, no go. It's not going to work. Short term, overnight or whatever, it's nice, but long term, if you're going to be at camp for 3+ days, this is not the product you want. So the last con, and this is a big one for me, is the temperature inside the cooler. Now, I want to point out that you cannot set the temperature. The compressor kicks on and it just runs constantly. It doesn't matter what the temperature is inside the chiller. And as advertised, it says that it should drop the temperature 40 degrees below ambient temperature, whatever temperature it is outside. It should be 40 degrees less than that. I have never ever seen that. It's usually 30 to 32 degrees below whatever the outside temperature is, which means if it's 80 or 90 degrees like it is out in the desert, it's not going to be cold enough in here to store food for a long period of time. And that has been a big drawback and the reason I ended up purchasing the refrigerator. Now, this is really nice if it's cool outside, you can keep the temperature low inside, or if you just want to cool your drinks. But I will show you just the last 2 days at the end of the video how the temperature is held just sitting in here in my garage. Now, let's talk about the refrigerator. Now, let's talk about what I'm using currently for the last 2 months, and that is this Dometic CFX 40 refrigerator. This thing has been a really a nice upgrade. And so the key thing that I like about it, for number one, for a pro, is you can set the temperature. Now you can set it all the way down to 0 degrees. So not only can you use this as a refrigerator, but you can also use it as a freezer if you want to just freeze everything that's in there. It comes with both a power cord for 12 volt, and it also comes with a home wall power cord, which is really nice. What I also like is it's a very low amp draw. You know, when it reaches temperature, that compressor shuts off. So unlike the Coleman chiller, this is not running consistently. And it runs at 1.2 amp hours while it's running. So if it was to run consistently, that's what it would be. Now they claim that if it's 90 degrees outside and 40 degrees is the set temperature, it will use 0.74 amp hours, which is ridiculously low. So you have a very low power draw. And as I mentioned, that Goal Zero that I was using, I actually ran this off the Goal Zero for 3 days using that solar panel. Plus I was charging all my camera gear. So very low power draw, guys. This is a very nice upgrade so far. The other thing that I really like is you've got a lot of nice room. You've got an LED light inside here. You've got this nice basket that pops out and allows you to kind of pull things all out at once instead of, you don't want to get to something just one at a time. It's got a divider in there, and it just makes it really easy if you just want to pull the whole thing out and kind of reorganize things. And then you've got this little tray up front, which is very convenient. It's also portable. It's got these handles on here. I mean, this thing is a little heavy. It's about 38 pounds, but it does have handles on here so you can carry it around if you need to. And it's really just built very well for, you know, throwing in the back of the Jeep or pulling out if you're camping. You know, they've really kind of kept in mind adding some durable features like this extra reinforcement on the corners. It's a very nice feature that I think is a definite pro. It's going to help this thing last for a long time to come. The compressor is very quiet. It actually is rated at 42 decibels, which is almost nothing. When it turns on, you have to really kind of listen to hear it. I mean, the green light will turn on to let you know the compressor is running, but when it turns on, I barely notice it. Unlike the Coleman chiller, which you definitely hear it when it kicks on when you're standing next to it. And this thing holds temperature very well. I have had no issues with it whatsoever. This has been a very nice upgrade. Now, a couple cons. One is the price, right? We pay a premium to have this refrigerator for sure. Almost $800, and it goes higher if you start to get the larger ones. So you're gonna pay a price to be able to do all those things we just mentioned about and having those nice features. But to me, it's been worth it over the last couple months. This has been a nice upgrade. And the last con is the size of this thing. It's definitely bigger than the other two. So it's something you need to think about on when you're packing it in the back of whatever vehicle it is, that this is going to take up a little more room. Okay, now that we've talked about the pros and cons of this Dometic, let's take a look at how the temperatures have fared on all 3 of them over the last 2 days. So you guys ready to hear how the temperatures fared over the last 2 days? Well, let me just tell you that yesterday it was about 80 degrees outside, and today it's just a little over 75. You gotta love Southern California. So the ice chest, yesterday's temperature, 39 degrees. Today's temperature, 37 degrees. So the ice, even though it was melted in mostly water today, has held its temperature very well. Now, the Coleman chiller, yesterday's temperature, 47 degrees inside. Today's temperature, 44 degrees inside. So that's a little disappointing, but that's been pretty consistent with what temperatures it's been putting out since I've owned this thing. And so that's why I go back and mention that this is a great chiller for your drinks, but I think if you're gonna store perishable foods in there, this is not the best device to do that in. Now, the refrigerator, okay? So I've had it set at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and it has been a plus or minus 32 degrees Fahrenheit for the last 2 days, and it kicks on when it needs to. So that's the benefit here. We set the temperature and it stays pretty constant. So That's it, guys. I thought that was pretty interesting to kind of test out those temperatures over the last 2 days. I'm actually very impressed with the ice, how well that did. All right, well, I hope you have found this video informative. You know, I think these all have their good pros and cons. You know, I think an ice chest is a great budget deal. I think if you just want to cool some drinks and you don't want to mess with ice, this is a great option. But if you want long-term cold food storage, then the Dometic fridge is the way to go. But that's just my opinion, guys. You let me know below in the comments what you think. What were some of the pros and cons that you maybe would have liked to me have mentioned? Let me know in the comments below, guys. And look, if you're visiting TrailRecon for the first time, please hit that subscribe button. Love to have you as a member of the TrailRecon team. Thanks for watching.